So last night, I fell into one of those internet rabbit holes. You know, it goes, you start with a simple question. In my case, it goes, what to watch on Netflix. And next thing you know, you're 3 hours deep reading about, of all things, movie remakes.
Yeah, I've been down that rabbit hole a time or two myself.
And it seems like everyone's got an opinion on them, too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, nobody's on the fence about remakes.
Nope.
It's either Hollywood's run out of ideas or give me all the Spider-Man reboots. So, I mean, speaking of strong opinions, you brought some fascinating insights to this deep dive, especially based on that article for or against movie remakes.
Yeah, it's a debate as old as Hollywood itself, isn't it? I mean, they've been remaking movies since practically the silent era.
Well, and it's true. I mean, some of those early films, those really old ones, they're tough to watch now.
Yeah.
So for today's deep dive, let's unpack this whole to remake or not to remake dilemma.
Sounds good.
So let's start with the folks who are pro-remake. What are their arguments? Besides the whole Hollywood's out of ideas thing, which, I mean, come on, there's got to be some new ideas out there, right?
Right. Well, one argument is that remakes can actually bridge the generation gap.
Okay, I can see that.
Like, take Ocean's 11. The Sinatra Rat Pack version, that's a classic. But let's be honest.
A little before our time.
Yeah, and honestly, it hasn't aged all that well for some viewers.
Sure.
But the Clooney remake, that one introduced that heist story, which is a fun story, to a whole new generation.
It really did. And it wasn't just a shot-for-shot remake either. It had Soderbergh style all over it.
Yeah, it had that early 2000s vibe.
Exactly. And, I mean, that soundtrack alone, instant classic, at least for us millennials.
For sure.
Right.
And that kind of highlights another argument for remakes being able to use modern technology to maybe even improve on the original.
It makes sense.
Like, compare the original King Kong to the Peter Jackson version.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
One used stop motion, the other had Andy Serkis acting his heart out in a motion capture suit.
Talk about a glow-up, right? Okay, but it's not always about the special effects.
Right.
The article also mentioned The Fly, the remake.
The Fly is actually a great example of a remake that used modern anxieties, modern fears to tell the story in a whole new light.
What do you mean?
Well, the original The Fly, it had its moments, but Cronenberg's version that tapped into the whole AIDS epidemic, the fear of disease, and it turned a kind of campy horror movie into this really gruesome, tragic film.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. So, okay, point taken, remakes aren't always just cash grabs.
Right. Not always.
But, I mean, let's be honest, sometimes they are.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that give remakes a bad rap, right? So let's talk about the arguments against remakes.
Well, the biggest argument is that most of the time, they just feel unnecessary.
Like, did we really need another Psycho?
Exactly. Gus Van Sant's shot-for-shot remake, it's a perfect example of a film that just felt redundant.
Even if it was well made, it's like, why? Why even bother?
Exactly. And then there's the argument that remakes actually stifle creativity.
How so?
Well, instead of investing in original stories, new voices, studios are just churning out the same old stuff.
Like a comfortable pair of shoes?
Yeah, exactly. It's familiar, it's safe, but it's not pushing any boundaries.
And then there are those remakes that are just, well, flat out bad, like The Wicker Man with Nicolas Cage. What was he thinking?
Those are the ones that really give fuel to the anti-remake fire, especially when a beloved classic is involved.
It's like trying to repaint the Mona Lisa. You're just going to make people angry.
Exactly. And then you get into this whole debate about artistic integrity versus, the business side of Hollywood.
Because, let's be real, Hollywood is a business.
Exactly. Remakes, they just make financial sense most of the time.
They have that name recognition.
Exactly. Built-in audience, less risk. And it's a lot easier to market a familiar title than to convince audiences to take a chance on something new.
Plus, you got that whole nostalgia factor, right?
Okay.
I mean, who doesn't love the idea of revisiting the movies they loved as a kid?
Right. Even if it's a pale imitation, it's still comfort food.
So, I mean, I guess the big question is, can a remake ever be better than the original?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. I mean, sometimes a remake can offer a genuinely fresh take, updating the story for a modern audience, maybe using technology to create a more immersive experience.
So it's not always a lost cause.
Right.
So next time you hear about a remake, maybe don't roll your eyes just yet. Think about it for a second, right? It could be a train wreck, sure, but it might also be a surprisingly fresh take on a familiar story.
Exactly.
What makes a good remake for you? Is it all about staying true to the original, or can a remake reinvent itself? That's something to think about the next time you're browsing for something to watch.